All right, so today we're going deep on Osho.
Okay.
You sent us a lot of stuff. I
Yeah.
see bios, book lists, even some research papers. Looks like you really want to understand this guy.
Yeah.
Beyond just the whole Rolls-Royce guru thing, right?
Right.
Like, who was he really?
It's fascinating. I mean, these sources we have paint such a complex picture of this guy.
Yeah.
Like, on one hand, you see this intense spiritual seeker, someone who was exploring all this, meditation and mystical traditions.
Right, from a young age, too.
Oh, yeah, from a very young age.
Like almost from childhood.
Exactly. But then at the same time, you see this rebellious streak in him, like this constant challenging of norms, anything established, really, both religious and societal.
Yeah. It's definitely not the typical image that comes to mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
You think spiritual leader.
Yeah. No, not at all.
So to really get this complexity, I guess we need to start at the beginning. He was born in 1931 in India.
Right.
And it sounds like he was fascinated by mysticism, even as a kid.
Absolutely. There's a story about him as a young boy, like spending an entire night in a temple that was known for having venomous snakes.
Right. Yeah.
And just letting them crawl all over him.
Oh, my gosh.
It was like he was determined to confront his fear of death.
Wow.
Head on.
At such a young age.
I know, right? Even at that age.
Wow, that's some image.
Yeah.
Most kids are afraid of, like, spiders under their bed.
Right.
Not a temple full of snakes.
Exactly.
So this fearlessness, it sounds like, it was a core part of who he was.
It really does seem that way. And it really foreshadows his later challenges to authority, too.
Yeah.
Even as a young man, he would just speak his mind, often criticizing people like Mahatma Gandhi.
Interesting.
And it wasn't just disagreeing with Gandhi's politics or anything. He went so far as to question Gandhi's spiritual authority.
Wow.
Which was pretty radical at the time.
Yeah, definitely ruffling some feathers there.
Yeah.
So what was it about Gandhi that he disagreed with so strongly?
Well, one of the main things was Gandhi's emphasis on poverty and asceticism. Osho believed that India's focus on this renouncing the world, the spiritual renunciation,
Right.
that it was actually holding the country back. He actually argued that embracing capitalism and technology, that those could be pathways to progress,
Interesting.
both material and spiritual.
Wow. That's definitely a different perspective. It sounds like he was kind of turning traditional ideas about spirituality on their head.
Yeah, exactly. And this challenging of traditional norms, that extended to his approach to sannyas as well.
Sannyas.
Yeah, that ancient Indian practice of renouncing the world to pursue spiritual stuff.
Right, right.
So in the late 1960s, he started initiating followers into what he called neo-sannyas.
Okay, so how is neo-sannyas different?
Well, traditional sannyas, it involves renouncing all your worldly possessions and attachments, to pursue enlightenment.
Yeah.
But Osho's neo-sannyas, it kind of flipped that idea on its head.
Okay.
He encouraged his followers, they were called sadhyasins.
Yes.
Yeah, to fully engage with the world, to have careers, relationships, enjoy material things. But to do it all with awareness and detachment,
Okay.
he believed that true renunciation, it was an inner state, not an outward act.
So it's about changing your relationship with the world.
Yeah.
Rather than withdrawing from it.
That's the core idea. And to help his followers with this inner transformation, Osho developed a whole system of meditation techniques.
Okay.
And they were specifically tailored for modern life.
Interesting.
He believed that people needed tools to deal with, like, the stresses of modern society before traditional meditation could even be effective.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's like you have to clear the mental clutter before you can cultivate stillness. So did the sources talk about any of these techniques?
They do, and some of them were pretty unconventional for the time, like incorporating things from Western psychotherapy, and even practices like, dynamic breathing and cathartic emotional release. He also created techniques that involved dancing and celebrating and really embracing the full spectrum of human emotion.
That sounds pretty different from the silent seated meditation most people imagine.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Osho believed that suppressing emotions, that it was actually counterproductive to spiritual growth. He wanted people to express themselves fully and then move beyond those emotions to find a deeper sense of peace.
I see. So this blending of Eastern and Western approaches and this emphasis on emotional well-being, It seems pretty relevant today.
It does.
I mean, given the growing interest in things like mindfulness and emotional intelligence.
Yeah, it's remarkable how prescient some of his ideas were. But of course, not everyone was receptive to this message.
Right.
As his following grew,
Yeah.
so did the controversy.
So those early meditation camps
Okay.
and the growing number of sannyasins, they started to attract attention.
They did.
And not always the good kind.
Right. There were criticisms from religious leaders
Yeah.
who saw his teachings as heretical. And there were concerns from government officials
I bet.
about the potential for social unrest.
So the stage was already set for conflict, even before the whole Rajneeshpuram thing.
Precisely. But before we get to that, let's take a closer look at how Osho's teachings evolved and how they spread beyond India,
Okay.
because that played a crucial role in what happened next. So one of the things about Osho was that he was a prolific communicator. Even as a teenager, he was expressing his ideas in these handwritten magazines.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, in these early writings. They give us a glimpse into his worldview, like his fascination with philosophy and mysticism, and even his sharp wit, which would become a hallmark later on.
So even before the lectures and the meditation camps, he was already exploring these big questions
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
about life and meaning.
From a young age, he was grappling with those things.
And challenging conventions, too, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah, for sure, those early writings. They also show his tendency to question authority and to poke fun at traditional beliefs. You can see that independent thinking even back then.
It makes you wonder if those early magazines, like, planted the seeds for his later clashes with religious and political figures.
It's possible. I mean, it's hard to say how widely those writings were circulated.
Right.
But they definitely show a young man who was passionate about his ideas and eager to share them.
It seems like that passion for communication has just found new outlets as he got older.
Exactly. After graduating with a master's in philosophy, he spent 9 years teaching at a university.
Oh, wow. So this is where he really honed those speaking skills.
Yeah.
And started to refine that unique perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. His lectures were known for being engaging, thought-provoking.
Yeah.
He had this knack for connecting with people, using humor and storytelling to make complex ideas more accessible.
And this is also where that critique of organized religion started to emerge.
Yeah, his critique of traditional moral codes, it definitely became more pronounced during that time.
So it sounds like those university years were a crucial training ground for him.
In a lot of ways. Yeah, you could say that.
And did he start attracting a following back then?
Yeah, during this time. He started to gain a reputation as a dynamic speaker. And as a controversial thinker, people were drawn to his charisma and his unconventional ideas.
And after leaving the university?
He started traveling around India, conducting meditation camps and drawing these increasingly large crowds.
This is where things really start to take off.
It is, yeah, you could say that.
This is when he starts to make a name for himself.
Exactly. And those early meditation camps, they were quite intense.
Well,
He'd experiment with all these different techniques, pushing people to confront their fears and limitations. And there are accounts of people having these profound emotional breakthroughs.
Wow.
But also, some people found the experience overwhelming.
Really?
Even disturbing.
Wow. So he was really shaking things up.
Oh, yeah. No doubt about that.
Which probably just added to his notoriety.
Most likely.
And who were these early followers? Were they mostly from India, or were people traveling from other countries?
It was a mix. Initially, most of his followers were Indian, but as word spread, people from Europe and North America, they started seeking him out.
So this influx of Westerners, it had a pretty significant impact on his teachings.
It did. It really did.
In what way?
Well, Osho was always interested in bridging Eastern and Western thought.
Right.
He saw value in both and believed they could complement each other.
I see.
So having Westerners in his audience, it encouraged him to adapt his teachings to this more globalized perspective.
So it wasn't just about exporting Eastern spirituality to the West. He was actively integrating different perspectives.
Yeah, he was creating something new.
That's fascinating.
It is.
And it's this synthesis of Eastern and Western thought, combined with that emphasis on personal transformation, that really made his teachings so appealing.
To a global audience.
Exactly. So this brings us to the ashram in Pune. In 1974, this seems like a pivotal moment. It's a shift from traveling and temporary camps to creating a more permanent space.
It was.
For this growing community.
The Pune ashram, it became a hub for his whole movement, attracting thousands of people from all over.
Wow.
And it wasn't just a place for meditation and spiritual practice. It was a whole community with its own social structure, businesses, creative endeavors.
It almost sounds like he was creating an alternative society.
Yeah.
Like a microcosm of the world he envisioned.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. He wanted to create a space where people could experiment with different ways of living and relating and expressing themselves.
Which, of course, generated more controversy.
Of course.
The lifestyle.
Yeah.
The challenges to traditional morality. The sheer size of the community.
Yeah, it drew criticism from both religious and secular authorities.
So even within India, there was pushback against his teachings.
Oh, absolutely.
And as the Poon ashram grew, it became harder to manage.
It did.
Logistical challenges, political pressures.
Yeah, and just tensions with the local community.
So this sets the stage for the move to Oregon and the creation of Rajneeshpuram. But before we get to that, I want to pause for a second and delve a little deeper into Osho's teachings.
Okay.
What were some of the key ideas that he emphasized during those years in Pune?
Well, one of the central themes is the importance of self-discovery. Osho believed that each person has this potential for enlightenment, but that the path to that realization, it's unique for everyone.
Right.
He encouraged his followers to question everything.
Interesting.
To break free from dogma.
Right.
And to find their own truth.
So it wasn't about blindly following rules.
No.
It was about cultivating this spirit of inquiry.
That's right.
Exploration.
Exactly.
And that emphasis on individual experience.
Yeah.
That extended to his approach to meditation as well.
It did. He developed a wide range of techniques, not as rigid prescriptions, but as tools for people to experiment with and find what worked best for them.
So finding the path that resonated with your own needs.
Yes, exactly.
Another key aspect was the celebration of life.
Yes.
In all its fullness.
Yes. He didn't advocate for asceticism or denial. He believed that true spirituality. It embraced the totality of human experience, including love, sexuality, creativity, even material abundance.
And that's where we see that contrast. With those more traditional ascetic practices, it was a more embodied, integrated approach.
Yeah, you could say that.
And it's that emphasis on embracing life's fullness. Yeah. That led to some misunderstandings.
It did.
Accusations of hedonism, even. So was that accurate?
Well, not really. He emphasized awareness, responsibility, and conscious choice in all aspects of life.
So not mindless gratification.
No, not at all.
It was about bringing consciousness to everything.
That's the key difference.
It's a nuanced perspective. That was probably easy to miss.
It was.
With all the sensational headlines and the controversy. But those controversies, especially the events surrounding Rajneeshpuram, they tend to overshadow everything else.
They do.
All the deeper philosophical and spiritual aspects of his teachings. The Rajneeshpuram story, it's a fascinating chapter.
It is.
And it definitely shaped how people saw him.
It did.
And his movement. And it's a story we can't ignore in this deep dive.
No, we can't.
So let's shift gears now.
Yeah.
And explore that period in Oregon.
Okay.
And see how Osho's vision played out and ultimately unraveled in the American West.
The story of Rajneeshpuram, it's full of contradictions, you know?
Yeah.
You have this group of people trying to build a utopia based on peace and love, but then they end up in these conflicts with the locals, even resorting to criminal acts.
It's a reminder that even with good intentions, things can really go off the rails.
They can.
Especially when you have strong personalities and clashing values.
Exactly. And it's important to remember the context, too. This was rural Oregon in the early 80s. The mindset there, it clashed with the free-spirited culture of Osho's followers.
Oh, yeah, those better dead than red bumper stickers. I mean, that says it all.
Yeah, they do.
What were some of the specific issues that fueled that conflict?
Well, for one, the sheer size of the commune. It was unsettling to a lot of the locals. I mean, they transformed this huge ranch into a functioning city in just a few years.
Yeah, that's a lot of change, especially in a rural community.
It is.
And then there was the whole lifestyle thing, Osho's teachings on free love, the unconventional relationships.
All of that was seen as a threat
to traditional values.
Exactly.
People were worried about hippies and cults.
Yeah, those were the terms being used.
All those associations with drugs and promiscuity.
Right.
So it was fear of the unknown, really.
I think so. And maybe a lack of understanding, too.
About what Osho's teachings were actually about.
Yeah, and those fears were amplified by the media, too.
Of course.
Which often portrayed the commune in a very sensationalized way.
And then you have the political dimension.
Right.
Osho's followers were getting involved in local politics.
Which definitely didn't help.
No.
It further antagonized the existing power structure.
And all that friction, it escalated pretty dramatically.
It did.
Culminating in that salmonella poisoning incident.
Right.
Orchestrated by Ma Anandshila, Osho's personal secretary.
That was a major turning point.
It was.
I mean, up to that point, the conflict had been mostly rhetorical and legal.
Yeah.
But Sheila's actions, they crossed a line.
They did.
And ultimately led to the downfall of Rajneeshpuram.
It's hard to believe how things spiraled like that. Did the sources give any insight into Sheila's motivations? Was she acting on Osho's orders?
That's a question that's been debated a lot. Osho himself denied any knowledge of her criminal activities. He claimed she was power-hungry and acting independently.
So there's this question of accountability.
Yeah.
Was Osho really unaware?
Or was he turning a blind eye?
Yeah, it's tough to say for sure.
It is.
But it's clear that Sheila was a strong personality.
She was.
And she had a lot of influence in the commune.
No doubt.
And her actions had devastating consequences, not just for the commune, but for Osho's reputation and the future of his movement.
Yeah. The Rajneeshpuram saga, it cast a long shadow.
It did.
Osho was arrested and deported.
Right.
He faced deportation from other countries, too.
Wow.
Before eventually returning to India.
And his teachings, they were often dismissed.
Yeah, just as the ramblings of a cult leader.
It's kind of tragic.
It is.
This attempt to create a utopian community.
Based on spiritual principles.
Right.
It imploded.
And the fallout really tarnished his image.
But Osho continued to teach and write, even after all that.
He did.
He used those experiences in Oregon, including the betrayal, as lessons for his disciples.
So even though the Rajneeshpuram experiment failed, he was able to find meaning in it.
Yeah.
And incorporate those lessons into his teachings.
He did.
His later discourses. They often touched on those themes. Power, betrayal, forgiveness.
Right.
The challenges of creating a conscious society.
And when he returned to India, he reestablished his ashram in Pune.
Did his teachings change at all during this final phase of his life?
They did. There's a noticeable shift. He delves deeper into Zen Buddhism and explores the ancient meditation techniques described in the Vijnana Tantra.
The Vijnana Tantra.
Yeah, it's this ancient Hindu text. It outlines 112 methods of meditation.
112?
Yeah, it's a lot.
That's intense.
It is. It reflects his lifelong fascination with human consciousness and the pursuit of enlightenment. He also continued to develop his approach to emotional healing, emphasizing techniques like laughter and crying as forms of catharsis.
Yeah, those techniques were mentioned in the sources. He believed that expressing those emotions could release pent-up energy and lead to a deeper sense of peace.
Exactly. He wasn't afraid to encourage people to be emotionally expressive.
Yeah, even if it went against social norms.
It didn't matter to him. He saw it as an important part of self-discovery and healing.
It's interesting how those ideas are coming back around. With the growing interest in emotional well-being.
It is.
And processing our feelings.
It shows how ahead of his time he was.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this deep dive on Osho, what do you think is the most important takeaway for our listener?
Well, Osho was a complex and contradictory figure. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But he was also a brilliant teacher. He challenged us to question our assumptions, to explore our inner depths, and to embrace life fully.
He left behind a lot to think about.
He did. A rich body of work. That continues to inspire people all over the world.
He definitely left his mark.
He did.
And even though his methods were often controversial, that core message of self-discovery and personal transformation, it still resonates with people from all walks of life.
And that's perhaps his greatest legacy, that invitation to look within, to question, to experiment, and to find our own path.
To enlightenment.
However that looks for each of us.
And on that note, we'll leave you with a thought from Osho himself. Be realistic. Plan for a miracle. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.